Hey, what's up? My name is Tyson Brown and I want to welcome you to Tyson's Fitness Tips podcast. This is Australia's top health and fitness podcast to help you lose weight, look good with your shirt off, feel confident in your body, and finally achieve the goals you want with your health and fitness. So 5 days a week, I'm going to be giving you top information from myself and also from leading experts in the field so you know everything you need to do to get in the best shape of your life. From nutrition to mindset to workout, everything is covered in this podcast and you need to go nowhere else. So like I said, it's going to be 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, in your ears with quick actionable segments that you can implement straight away, because the most important thing is that you can put these things into play. Also, if you listen all the way to the end of the episode, you're going to get 2 special gifts that you can download upon listening to it. So make sure you listen all the way to the end to get those free gifts, okay? So let's get into the episode. Cool. What's going on, guys? It is Tyson Brown here, back with another episode of Tyson's Fitness Tips. Now, I know it's been a while since we've had someone on, and I'm super excited for this guest today because, well, he is a very, very evidence-based practitioner, and I love following Menno's journey because what he teaches is what the evidence shows. He's not some bullshit guru. He's not trying to sell you certain things. He's going to give you the information that's been proven to work through science and research. So, his name is Menno Henselmans, and I'm so glad to have him on today. Menno, thank you so much for coming on, mate.
My pleasure.
Now, for those people who don't know you, can you give us a bit of a background about how you actually got into the fitness industry?
Sure. I actually got into the fitness industry after I had already started working. I started off working as a business consultant and switched to fitness later. Because I found out that it was more the career path that was expected of me by my parents and by society, and the more traditional money-making good career, and not what I was really passionate about, which had always been fitness and sports. So I started writing, and then I got into coaching as people started asking me for that. It wasn't really a plan at first, but it worked out very well. And then people started asking me how to coach people. So I started mentoring people, and that's still what I do now. I do full-time online coaching, as well as hosting and organizing my online PT course certification program, which is now also doing very well and available in multiple languages.
Well, so it seems like you've come like a long way from the transition to being in the business world to completely flipping into the fitness industry and now coaching coaches and how they can become better coaches for other clients too.
Definitely. It's been a wonderful journey so far, and I haven't regretted the career switch a single day in my life.
And so, like, in regards to that, because you were in, like, you're focused more on the stats side of things, is that why it was so easy for you when you came into the fitness industry to be able to, I guess, read journals and things like that and understand more of an evidence-based practice?
Definitely. It helped a lot, I would say, because when I started writing, that was one of the main things that sort of annoyed me about the fitness industry, or I thought could be better. The lack of evidence-based thinking and the lack of trusting in research. A lot of opinions. What's his name? Famous actor Clint Eastwood said about. Not sure if I can say that on a podcast, but opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. So everyone has an opinion, but it's harder to substantiate it with data and solid arguments. So. When I started writing, that was specifically my main thing, what I wanted to do, and that worked well. And I probably was lucky too, because it sort of coincided with the dawn of what's now evidence-based fitness. That wasn't really that much of a thing yet when I got into the fitness industry. So there was probably also a luck component there.
It's actually interesting because I've been talking to other people, like I was talking to my friend who's a nurse in the medical industry, and they use evidence-based practices, and it's funny how it's only just starting to come into the fitness side of things of people following that side of that type of route.
Definitely, yeah. That's where the name comes from, evidence-based medicine, and it was a thing quite a while before that in medicine. Although most doctors still really aren't very evidence-based. And for me, I never really used the term. I originally started the company called Bayesian Bodybuilding, which long-term readers may recall. And the Bayesian refers to the use of statistics from Thomas Bayes, a statistician. So basically what I was taught at Warwick and at University College is to implement statistical data sciences along with scientific research skills. And I never really used the term evidence-based. I would use terms like data-driven, for example. That's a more common term in consultancy. But it really always the same thing, as one of my supervisors once said. It really, in the end, it all just comes down to being reasonable.
I really like that. And do you, how much time do you dedicate in, let's say, a day or a week for you actually still, because obviously you're still going through research now. How much time do you usually dedicate to looking into these type of things? About
24 times 7 hours. No, it's I do work a lot, but actual reading research, I usually do that in the mornings. So okay. Probably from generally 9 to 1, 9 to 2. That's reading research, writing, updating the PT course, those kind of things, more creative and intellectual tasks. And then generally I do coaching work after that. And then at the end of the day, I'll generally have another work bout where I do whatever I want to do or what's most pressing at the time.
So you still got your finger on the pulse pretty much 24/7 as much as you can?
Yeah, I definitely work a lot. I think that's really needed as an entrepreneur, and also because I'm now doing what I'm really passionate about, it doesn't feel like working.
Absolutely. When you do it, you enjoy it. Like time, and I'm assuming for you, time goes pretty quickly when you're sitting down and you're just getting into what you actually enjoy doing.
Definitely, yeah. You go into flow, as psychologists call it.
That's it. And so, obviously, you're very research, evidence-based, backed up. So, what we wanted to cover today was some myths that people still think are out there, but clearly the research shows differently. So, you sent me through a couple of myths that we want to go through, that I wanted to go through together. So, I was thinking the first one is a slow metabolism gets you fat easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something you commonly hear, but isn't really that true. In the sense that someone's basal metabolic rate is heavily influenced by fibroid metabolism, and that coincides very strongly with appetite. So most people that have a very fast metabolism also have a much larger appetite than other people. And if you look at research where you try to predict body weight changes from BMR and the like, the relation isn't very strong. Not to mention, the variation in BMR isn't that large to begin with. The standard deviation, as it's called, is a measure of how much variance there is in BMR, is about 100. I think 100, 130, 125, something like that. And the coefficient of variation, which is another measure, is only a few percent. What that means concretely is that about 95% of the population falls within about a 500 calorie BMR range, which is substantial, but not as large as a lot of people would probably think. They think that there are some people that can just eat 6,000 calories a day and never get fat, and other people have to. No matter what I do, I'm truly eating 800 calories a day, and no, I'm still not losing fat. Those things usually aren't accurate to begin with, and they're also very heavily influenced, research finds, by activity level and more predictable components of energy expenditure than simply a genetic component of basal metabolic rate.
Right, so what you're saying is, let's say you and I were both 80 kilos, and if we did a BMR score, let's say I got 1,700 calories, you would get somewhere close to that, between 1,700 and, let's say, the top end range would be 2,200 if you're lucky. Is that right?
Yes, in fact, that's in the general population. Those figures are without even taking into account body composition. If you take into account body composition, the variance is even less. So that's a good point. And a lot of people that have a very different metabolic rate is also predictable because they have more muscle mass. If you compare like a 100 kilogram bodybuilder with a 50 kilo bikini competitor, then of course the bodybuilder is going to have a much faster metabolism because he's way heavier.
Of course. Okay, so that makes sense. So what you're explaining is like our BMRs are basically based on the same weight. They burn the same amount of calories. Like you and I, if we were both 80 kilos, we'd burn about the same. But where it differentiates is our activity levels and other things that can be affected in everyday life.
Yes, and also metabolic adaptivity does vary a lot more per individual, but that usually goes both ways. So it's not something that inherently makes it harder to lose fat, or at least not much. So if you have a very adaptive metabolism, just like basal metabolic rate, if you have a very high metabolic rate, you probably also have a large appetite. And if you have a very low metabolic rate, you probably also have a low appetite. So it's even if you have very slow metabolism, as people would call it, meaning you have a low metabolic rate or a low energy expenditure, and if you also have a low appetite, that doesn't make it harder to diet, because for you, living on, say, 2,000 calories may be just as hard as someone with very fast metabolism and very fast or very high appetite to live on 3,000 calories. And I see that with some clients very much. I have some guys that have no problem at all. They're pretty small guys, mind you, at about 1,600 calories a day. And I have other guys that have great difficulty even cutting on 3,000 calories, because the food volume they eat is several fold larger, and still they're hungry. Because if you think about it, only the ratio between your appetite and your metabolic rate is what truly matters. Because if you have a larger appetite, that's in the end what it comes down to. You have to satiate your appetite, right? If you didn't have an appetite, you could just choose not to eat and you'd lose fat. You could just choose exactly what you'd eat and it wouldn't be a problem. So fundamentally, the problem, especially in the long run for most people, is appetite. And that has to be proportional to energy expenditure.
Oh, right, I see. See, when you said that people find it hard to cut on 3,000 calories, that is my life. Like, I am one of those people where I'm like, I could have so much volume of food. Like, I have a lot of fiber, protein, and things in my diet, but I'm like, you know what, I'm still hungry.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what a lot of people notice with me at sushi.
And so, in saying that, when we see people, like, you said people say they have a slow metabolism, they say, I see these people eating, let's say 6,000 calories a day and they don't put on weight. And that's due to the energy they expend just in everyday life. So these people may fidget more, they may be more active outside of work. There are other components that are going to actually have that individual burn off those calories. Isn't that right?
Definitely. So the components of energy expenditure generally are the thermic effect of food, which is roughly the energy used to digest and absorb energy. Your basal metabolic rate, which is the energy your organs need to function, your body needs to stay alive even if you're in a coma, and activity-related energy expenditure. So that includes going to the gym, but also your habitual activity level, and even subconscious activity like fidgeting, like you mentioned. So these components together explain energy expenditure, and quite predictably so. Not only that, most people that you think eat 6,000 calories often really don't. So there was this whole thing with Michael Phelps. What was it? 8,000 calories supposedly that he ate.
Yeah, something like that a day.
Yeah, it wasn't even near that in reality. And that's someone with an extremely high activity level. Most people that you think eat, or many people think eat a lot of crap and a lot of calories, they eat much more infrequently to begin with. If someone has a low meal frequency, it always appears like they eat more because every time you eat with them, they have very large meals. Whereas if you do a typical 6 meals a day bodybuilder type meal, then people only see you eat very small meals. So you usually don't have a very good idea of what people actually eat unless you really follow them around for several days a week nonstop.
I think that's a really key point, because I had a friend who came to me and said he can't put on weight, and then I asked him what he ate, and he told me, today I ate this and this and this, and I was like, okay, what about the day before? He goes, maybe I had like a sandwich for lunch and just a piece of chicken for dinner. And people's like infrequency, not just in the day, but even like over the accumulation of the day, is like some days they could be eating hardly anything, and other days they could be eating more calories, and it could even out to only like 2,500 calories a day.
Right, that's not being able to consume enough calories. That's what I call a luxury problem.
Yeah, you and me both. And so with that, Menno, I guess like the big point we're trying to make here is people shouldn't focus so much on their quote unquote metabolism, but things they can change. So their activity levels, exercise, the type of food they're eating. Whole nutritious foods is going to have a bigger TEF slightly. Just certain things like that would be more of a focus for them.
Definitely. In the long run, for most people, the main priorities are finding sustainable ways to decrease your energy intake and increase your energy expenditure. Now, energy expenditure isn't that modifiable for most people, at least not in an effortless fashion. There are things like a standing desk, drinking more water, those kind of tips that can help a lot. But for most people, by far, the biggest challenge is just learning to cope with a lower energy intake.
And that's going to take a long time for people to get used to. It's not going to happen overnight. You've got to work your way into that by finding satiating foods, by doing things that are going to keep you away from trigger foods, certain things like that.
Definitely. It's definitely with coaching, what I experience is that for a lot of people, some things it's even better to just have people experience them and only then talk about it, because you'll learn so much more from it than if someone just sort of gives you the blueprint, because it doesn't click. And if it hasn't, you haven't felt it, then you don't learn from it.
Exactly. I really like that point. Like, you've just got to, dip your toe in the water to experience what it feels like.
Exactly.
Okay, so myth number 1, slow metabolism, that is busted. Now, number 2 is that you have a body fat set point. So what exactly does that mean, Menno?
That's a good question. So a body fat set point, the way I define it, which is the original definition, is the idea, and I think also most people in the population have this as a rough idea, it's sort of basically a genetic number that's sort of printed into your DNA, which your body tries to get back to no matter what. So say somebody has a body fat set point of 16% body fat then as a male, or like 26 as a female, and then the body supposedly does everything it can to get back to that level. So if you get leaner than that, then the body will try to make you fatter again. And it's true that the body has adaptive metabolisms in place that preserve homeostasis, which means your energy expenditure goes down if you lose weight, and even if you just lose fat, and your appetite increases. And together, those forces basically drive you to regaining the weight that you lost, at least a little bit. But those same forces also resist weight gain. So it's not like the body is doing everything it can to prevent you from getting lean. It's just defending against change per se in both directions. So these really aren't, many people call them anti-starvation mechanisms, but they are homeostatic mechanisms. They are not there to prevent you from getting lean. They are there to simply maintain body composition in either direction.
Okay, so can you just repeat that last bit again, just so we can get that really clear?
Sure. So if someone has a very adaptive metabolism,
yep,
that's what occurs. Adaptive thermogenesis. Adaptive thermogenesis is actually the decrease in energy expenditure beyond what you'd expect from someone's loss of body weight, because loss of body weight lowers their BMR.
Mm-hmm.
If they decrease energy intake, that lowers the thermic effect of food, and those things will already cause someone's energy expenditure to go down as they lose weight, but someone's energy expenditure will go down more than that. That's called adaptive thermogenesis. Now, people vary a lot more in how adaptive their energy expenditure is, so how adaptive their thermogenesis is. Thermogenesis means heat production, basically energy expenditure, then BMR. But if you have a very adaptive metabolism, like me, for example, and you diet, your metabolism goes down a lot. But if you then start eating more, your metabolism also goes up a lot. So basically, if you have very adaptive metabolism, it's more difficult to change your weight. Not necessarily just more difficult to lose weight, but it's also more difficult to gain weight. Whereas I have a client that has the most static metabolism I've ever seen. If he increases his energy intake by literally 50 calories, we will be able to detect weight gain the next week.
Wow.
The difference for him between cutting and bulking is like 200 calories at most. Whereas for me, it can be 2,000 calories. If I want to get into contest shape or for a photo shoot, I almost always have to go down below 2,000 calories a day. And I can bulk on 4,000 calories. So the difference for me is about 100%, whereas for him, it's not even 10%. That's basically two extremes of metabolic adaptivity.
Right, okay, so in this case, when you do diet, obviously you're losing weight, you're eating less food, and your body will compensate for that by adapting, and it can be, like, it can down-regulate all the things, so you burn less energy overall than you would expect, and the same thing is when it's bulking, the body can adapt, so when you're eating more food, your activity level could go up and other things too, with, like, that's when fidgeting and stuff can increase also, and that means you have to eat more and more to try and gain that body fat, is that right?
Yes, that's right, and going back to your original question about set point, these forces basically explain why, and some people have called this then a settling point, which is a term that I think has a lot more sense, in that most people do gravitate towards a certain body composition, but that's assuming a certain lifestyle. And that is the fundamental reason people yo-yo diet. In fact, the word diet comes from Greek dieta. It meant lifestyle. It didn't mean period of temporary suffering that you have to put yourself through to lose fat so you can look great at the beach and afterwards you can pig out again for the rest of the winter. It meant lifestyle. So if you change your lifestyle and you substitute different foods and you have a higher energy expenditure, you start working out, then that will cause a permanent energy gap, as it's called. So a difference between energy expenditure and energy intake. And that will have permanent positive effects on your body composition. So you'll get leaner and you'll stay leaner if you maintain that lifestyle. It's not like the body just puts the fat back on without you having any control over it. It's very, very predictable. So this is, in fact, for all the myths that are out there, the field of human metabolism is the number one field in nutritional sciences where we have come the closest to actual mathematical proof of how everything works. We can predict very precisely what will happen. We know the exact mechanisms, and we can even quantify everything in terms of calories or joules. So there really isn't much magic left at this point. It's just understanding the system. So with most people, what happens when they yo-yo diet is not that the body is just miraculously putting the fat back on. What happens is people go on a diet and then they go off the diet and they go back to the same lifestyle that got them fat in the first place, which, because your metabolism is so predictable, will get them fat again. And you can keep repeating that as often as you want. If you don't make sustainable lifestyle changes, you will keep getting fat again afterwards. So in that sense, the idea of a setting point or even a settling point, I think is a very toxic idea to lifestyle change, and it's very demotivational. And it also doesn't make theoretical sense. So you could say that a settling point, there is some sense to that, but it is always still relative to your lifestyle. So my recommendation for most people is to get rid of both terms completely, forget they even exist, and you'll be much better off.
Absolutely. And I think, like, the biggest key there, like you said, is once you lose the weight, if you're keeping the, like, you know, obviously you're not going to be in that diet mentality for the rest of your life of, like, I have to restrict. But if you're making good conscious decisions about what you eat during the day, how active you are, you know, not keeping the foods that you used to have that would cause you to overeat in the house or being around them all the time, if you can make that a long-term habit of how you eat from now on, you're much more likely to keep that body fat off. And yes, when you finish the quote-unquote diet, you will regain a little bit of weight because now you have more food in your stomach. You're eating more food in general, but you're not going to put on all that extra fat that you've just lost as long as you've made that lifestyle change.
Exactly. I recently posted about this on Facebook. Like, I tell all my clients that I am never worried that if someone's motivated, I can get them a six-pack. The real challenge is doing it in a way that you can sustain so that you can have that six-pack not just for weeks or months, but for the coming years or decades. That is what for most people is the real challenge.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just, there are so many temptations around, so you do have to make the conscious effort to put in those good habits. And it's like, again, it's not going to happen once you finish the diet. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to have all those good habits. You've still got to work on ingraining them and trying to keep them.
Definitely.
So we've busted two of them so far, Menno. We've busted the slow metabolism. We've talked about not even worrying about the settling point or the set point and just focusing on implementing good habits. And so the third myth that I've got here is chronic dieting induces metabolic damage. So people I've had clients come to me before, I'm sure they've come to you and they've said, I've done so many diets before, I think I've damaged my metabolism.
Yeah, that is, even in research circles, the term metabolic damage the term metabolic damage isn't used that much in research circles, but there is an idea that there can be a permanent downregulation of energy expenditure after dieting. Several papers by Deleu et al., for example, talk about the fat getting fatter and how dieting makes you fat, those kind of things. I've co-authored the most extensive review on metabolic damage to date with Anastasia Sinchenko. And we looked at metabolic damage in various populations, and we found that adaptive thermogenesis is a very real thing. So like I said, if you're going to diet and you're going to lose weight, then your energy expenditure will decrease unless you put on so much muscle mass or increase your activity level so much that it offsets the weight loss, which decreases your BMR, and the fact that your lower energy intake has a lower thermic effect of food. So normally, if you diet, your energy expenditure will go down in a predictable way. But not only that, it goes down a bit more. So adaptive thermogenesis is, like I said, the decrease beyond those predictable factors. And that is mostly mediated by, as you said, things in your nervous system that make you move at a subconscious level. So things like fidgeting, bobbing your head to music, even the inherent efficiency of movement. Things that you really don't have that much control over and you're often not even aware of. Those things are regulated by the nervous system, and if you get really lean, the nervous system makes you conserve energy in that way. That is true, that really happens. But the idea of metabolic damage is that those changes are then permanent. And in our paper, we've looked at anorexics, malnourished individuals, bodybuilders, the Minnesota starvation experiment, where they actually literally starved people during the time of the Second World War until they were basically in contest shape, but without the muscle mass, so double screwed basically. And even in all of those circumstances, those extreme scenarios, we found that there is no permanent damage of someone's metabolic rate. So you can measure this as the ratio of predicted to measured BMR in studies, and it always rebounded back to the same level. So if you're, for example, a bodybuilder or a wrestler that cuts weight for a certain competition and uses very extreme measures and get to a very low body fat level, and you start off at, say, 90 kilos, 10% body fat, with energy expenditure of 3,000 calories. And you undergo all of that, and afterwards, you start bulking again, you get back to that body composition, you're at 90 kilos again with 10% body fat, and then your energy expenditure will be 3,000 calories again, because it's the same factors. You have the same body fat level, you have the same energy intake, assuming for the sake of the example, same thermic effect of food, so you have the same BMR, same adaptive thermogenesis level, and your energy expenditure will be exactly the same. In fact, if you logically think about it, if there was permanent metabolic damage, then those kind of populations, like physique athletes, like bodybuilders, and also wrestlers that often have to make weight, they would have no metabolism left after like 10 of those cycles, which clearly isn't the case anecdotally.
Yeah, of course, they would be either dead or they'd be eating like 2 stalks of celery a day, and that's all they'd be able to eat. So where's that myth come from then, Menno? Like if you there's been a lot of research showing that it actually doesn't happen, but like how did that actually start to come into play of people thinking about that?
I'm not sure where it really started. I think that's it comes from different directions, I think, because there are some research, like I say, Deleu is a very prominent proponent of this idea of metabolic damage. Mm-hmm. And there are some industry figures that are more known for it. Lane Norton was or is known for it, I still think. But actually, when I've done a seminar with him, and our views aren't that very different, and our applications aren't either. So it's more of a semantic argument probably than really the discussion of whether there's permanent But I think it comes from different directions, and probably also it's an easy excuse for some people, and people really want to hear, for funny enough, that there's something wrong with them, because it's much easier to know that your hormones are screwed, or that you need a detox, or that you have a damaged metabolism, and there is a pretty easy way to fix that, and then you do that. That's easier to believe than that you just have to change your whole lifestyle, which for most people it really comes down to.
People don't want to take the responsibility themselves that they're actually making bad decisions, that they have to change.
Yes, in a way.
And so I think the big thing we've kind of been covering here, Menno, like one thing that's been coming up again is adaptive thermogenesis, and also like when it comes to that, when people are dieting, able to prevent those things, like are there certain ways they can try and reduce the amount of adaptation that happens? So like let's say if they got a step tracker and they just made sure they let's say they started off their diet and they were doing 6,000 steps a day. And if they were going further into the diet period, if they could maintain that 6,000 or even increase their activity to, let's say, 8,000 to 10,000 steps, would that be a good way to try and prevent a little bit of that metabolic slowdown?
It will help to keep your energy expenditure up, but it will not offset adaptive thermogenesis. In fact, there is reasonable evidence that activity thermogenesis is constrained, which means that if you go up to very high activity levels, and if you force yourself to have a 10,000 step count on top of, say, cardio and a strength training session, then what many people experience is that their energy expenditure doesn't really seem to go up anymore. And they can pretty much do the cardio or not do the cardio, and their fat loss will be almost identical. And there's also a couple studies now that have looked at this that find that energy expenditure is constrained at very high levels of activity. And fortunately, high intensity exercise seems to be exempt from this, especially strength training. So you can always make a very big difference with strength training. And there's also good research showing that when I first posted this was extremely controversial, but there is now, since then, there have been several publications that found the same thing. Strength training is better for fat loss than cardio, like flat out better. Per minute of time, if you do strength training, people get leaner than if they do cardio. It's not relative or maybe in the long term or whatever. No, it's just better. If you just have a lot of people and you tell them you're going to do 60 minutes of exercise, and one group does strength training and the other does cardio, and even if you combine them, which a lot of people also thought, a combination is best. No, per minute of time, strength training beats cardio or a combination of the two, because it doesn't suffer from constrained energy expenditure. B, it builds muscle mass, which further increases your metabolic rate. And C, it helps you suppress your appetite, which helps you lower energy intake. Whereas if you compare that to cardio, cardio does suffer from constrained energy expenditure, at least at very high levels. Cardio is not as effective to decrease your appetite, and cardio does next to nothing to increase muscle mass beyond a very low novice level of physique. So strength training is pretty much the solution to keeping your metabolism up and getting stronger, and implementing progressive overload will also help you have a higher work output during training, which helps you have a higher energy expenditure. And there are certain ways that, being more active, a higher step count, those things can help. But inherently, there is nothing you can do about the adaptive thermogenesis.
There you go. It's actually funny you say that, because a lot of people, they do think you have to do cardio to lose weight. And the thing is, like, if you want to do cardio to lose weight because you think it's going to increase your energy expenditure, you've also got to think you adapt to that too. You become more efficient, because most people stick to a certain type of cardio. Once they become more efficient, they've either got to increase the resistance or go for longer to burn the same amount of calories that they were once burning when they first started, which is, people don't have a lot of time to spend in the gym.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, that's another factor, that if you do a certain movement efficiency increases, and the energy expenditure of that movement goes down a bit. It's only a few percent though, generally, so it's not a major concern, but it is a negative factor.
Right. So I think the biggest thing is here, obviously people need to figure out how many calories they need to be in a deficit, and focus more on the strength training 3 to 5 times a week, depending on how many days they can actually get into the gym.
Yeah, for most people, it's the amount of time that they're willing to train is generally the amount of time that, as for my clients at least, I have them train. Unless I really see that, if someone says, I'm willing to train 14 hours a week and they are a management consultant and they barely get enough sleep as it is, then, I will tone it down to probably 3 or 4 sessions because you also need to have a life. It needs to be sustainable. And there isn't a need to exercise all that much.
Oh, for sure. And one other thing, and that, when you were saying about strength training, can you just define that for people? Because I feel like I still see a lot of people in the gym, they try and turn their weights into a cardio session, if you know what I'm saying. They'll try and go from one thing to another as fast as they can. They'll try and do high reps too. And it's just like, what exactly, when you say strength training, like what exactly does that define?
Yeah, researchers usually use the term progressive resistance training, meaning that you are exercising with against a certain resistance, and you're trying to increase that resistance. I usually just call it strength training, which is, I think, more intuitive. And it means that, for one, progressive overload is important, because otherwise what is now a heavy resistance will cease to be heavy because you get stronger. And it's of high intensity. So you need an external resistance. That's why, for example, just push-ups, that will only get you so far. At some point, you can do 30 push-ups, and at that point, push-ups cease to be much of a stimulus for muscle growth or strength development.
Yeah.
And if you try to progress more in terms of endurance, then you won't progress that much in strength, and you won't build that much muscle mass, at least especially if you go above, say, 30 reps per set. So while that can work, there also isn't that much of a reason to do it, because for most people, energy expenditure isn't that different to begin with between low and high rep work. I mean, for most people, a strength training session burns about 300 to 500 calories. And if you're not very heavy and advanced, then you're more likely to be on the low end of that than the high end. So if you do everything you can to work up that energy expenditure, then you're looking at maybe 50 calories extra or so. Long run, that is for a lot less, and it's also going to impair muscle development. So the group that just focuses on those things will, over the long run, build more muscle mass, which increases their energy expenditure, build more strength, which increases their work output, and they'll generally have an easier time progressing, both in terms of muscle growth as well as in fat loss.
Huh. There you go. Guys, this is why I wanted to bring him on. He knows what he's talking about, and there's no, he's giving you research-backed evidence which you can go and apply into your own training, into your own diet, so you know that you're making the right things. So, Menno, I really do appreciate you coming on today, mate, to bust these myths and to give us a bit more of an insight about, when it comes to the dieting side of things. So, can you tell us more about where people can find you and what's coming up for you?
Sure, yeah. My website's mennohenselmans.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, mostly Facebook and Twitter. And I have a free email course if you're just getting started, or just want to basically get a sort of a best of the things I've written, my articles, and the things I've published over the years. Subscribing to my email course is probably the best way to go about that. It's 100% free, no gimmicks or whatever. And it's very, very long. Like most email courses are like the 7-day blueprint, and then they advertise their main product. I think my email course it started off more like a compilation of the best stuff, and it's like 20, 30 articles or something. So it's a bit overkill even, but we spread it out over a long time. I think a lot of people really enjoy it, and if not, you just press delete, right? So you can see if you like it, and I publish a lot of free stuff on my social media as well, like I said. So give it a follow.
Excellent. Guys, I'm going to put all that in the show notes so you can go and check out his website. Make sure you jump on the email course, because as he was just speaking, I've also jumped onto it because I always love learning from people above me. And Menno, I'll probably going to get you on for a round 2 eventually, because I love this podcast today. It was really, really informative, and I think the people are going to get a lot from it.
Sure. My pleasure, Tyson. Happy to talk.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. Guys, that is an episode done and dusted, and I'll speak to you next time. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. So now you've listened all the way to the end. That means you get some free goodies. So what you can do is you've got two different options, or you can take them both. I've got an intermittent fasting cheat sheet and a high protein 20 recipe meal guide designed specifically for you in your situation. These meal plans and this intermittent fasting guide are designed to help you burn stubborn belly fat and get in the best shape of your life. So all you have to do is go to the show notes, click on the download link, and they'll get sent straight to your email address. It's as simple as that. They're completely free. They're going to help you transform your body. So go to the show notes now and download your free guides, and I'll speak to you in the next episode.